Hello and welcome to the Healthy Middle Ground podcast with me, Jen Curtis. This week, I want to talk about ADHD and in particular, fat loss, training, exercise, diet for people with ADHD. And if you're listening to this, I'm going to assume that you have ADHD and you feel that in some ways or another, it gets in the way of you losing weight. Or maybe like a lot of my clients with ADHD, you're aware that certain things are very, very, very difficult for you. And so you're keen to know if there are strategies or solutions to the fact that you have ADHD, right? If there are things to do with your diet that maybe you're aware of the things that you find difficult and you're looking for kind of strategies to overcome those barriers. And this is a topic very close to my heart because I have ADHD. I was diagnosed as an adult, and like a lot of people with ADHD, especially those diagnosed in adulthood, it kind of explained a lot about my childhood or about why I was good at certain things and not others, or why I struggled with school. Now, ADHD is one of those topics that's a bit kind of radioactive because it obviously, it's a very, very wide net and it ends up sort of collecting a lot of extra people. There's lots of misdiagnoses. A lot of people have strong opinions about it not really being a thing, but I think it's most helpful to frame it. Just some people's brains work like this. I think it's a bit of a misnomer to call it a deficit disorder because I don't think it is actually a deficit and I don't think it is actually a disorder. It's just a way that some people's brains work. And when you learn about that, other people's brains work very, very differently in a much more linear manner. And when you learn about the way that your brain actually works, it makes a lot of sense why certain things are more difficult than others. And there are actually strategies for improving your results with ADHD. And like attracts like. So I think the fact that I am a bit of an ADHD personality, it ends up being that many, many, many of my clients have ADHD, either undiagnosed, but it's really, really obvious, or they already know it about themselves and they know what things they struggle with. But I would say a large proportion of my clients, probably about half of them, have ADHD. And also the world today, the modern world, it does tend to create in many of us ADHD-like tendencies, even if we don't actually have ADHD. So I have a lot of personal and professional experience working with ADHD or ADHD-like tendencies. At the end of the day, look, the physics is still the same, right? If you want to lose body fat, you have to be in a calorie deficit. You have to, for the large part, you have to eat less food or eat fewer calories, not necessarily less food, because you want to eat filling things and you want to eat more food, but just things with less calories. But that's not what this podcast is about today. And you need to move more, right? You are still subject to the exact same rules of thermodynamics as everyone else. You need to do more steps every day. You need to do some exercise. If you want to improve, if you want to build muscle, get stronger, if you want to improve your cardiovascular fitness, it's still the exact same rules as everyone else. So it's not like intermittent fasting is good for people with ADHD or this is good for people with ADHD. No, it's just that there are certain, once you understand how the ADHD brain works, you can identify certain things that people with ADHD struggle with, and there are many, many, many strategies that can help. Okay, so with all that out the way, let's talk about what people with ADHD struggle with. What I'm going to do is go through a list of things that people with ADHD struggle with, and then talk about some of the ramifications to diet and exercise. Okay, so each of the examples of kind of bigger things that people with ADHD struggle with, then applying it to fat loss. Like what does that create for people with ADHD that then makes fat loss difficult? So the big one is executive function, okay? Executive function means actually doing it, okay? Execution. So actually doing the thing instead of thinking about doing the thing or planning doing the thing. And what I find that creates in people with ADHD is a lot of wasting time on planning and replanning. Okay, so many of my clients who have ADHD, they want to plan over and over again. So like every week they want to do a meal plan, or they want to like redo their meal plan or replan their meals, and they struggle to just execute on the task. And often once the novelty wears off, they want to like start again. They'll often say something like, can we write a new plan? Or can you write me a new training plan? Or can we rewrite the meal plan? Rather than going back to what they have and tweaking whatever doesn't work or what they don't like about what they currently have. They kind of want to scrap everything and start again. And this creates lots and lots of extra work and lots of wasting time and energy and focus on something that doesn't matter, or something that they've already done, right? They've already got a plan. So what they really need to work on is like the execution of that plan rather than writing a new one, right? And they will spend an hour on writing a new plan that they don't need. And then they'll tell me that they don't have time for tracking. Translation for anyone who doesn't understand ADHD speak, what that means is that I found replanning or redoing my plan more interesting than tracking. Like tracking is boring, so I didn't want to do it. So I spent time doing something I didn't need to do that I found more interesting in the moment, okay, or that felt more compelling to do. Okay, so the second thing that people with ADHD struggle with is planning, okay? That might sound like a contradiction to my last point, but they often really find it very, very painful to come up with a plan, a strategy, a system, and then they're just left winging it and relying on how they feel from moment to moment, from day to day, rather than doing what, following a system and doing what they know works. And the reason that they struggle with planning is usually because they're overcomplicating it and trying to optimize for every single eventuality. So I find people like writing a meal plan, for example, the way that I do meal plans, it should take 10 minutes and it's super duper easy. But they will spend hours and hours and hours because they're trying to like optimize every single last thing, constantly vary things, try to include absolutely everything. So what ends up happening is they the things they want to include proliferate and grow and grow and grow until the task is like you're half an hour into the task, and now the task is so overwhelming that then you abandon it before actually completing it. So it's kind of half done and it's got way too much detail rather than just something super duper simple. So the third thing that people struggle with is working memory, which this leads to forgetfulness. It makes it very, very hard to keep track of everything that they've eaten that day. And as you will note, I will recommend the antidote to this is tracking, but we'll get to that. Number 4 is emotional regulation, which leads to emotional overwhelm, which leads to, if you don't have a plan, eating based on feelings. Number 5 is impulse control and dopamine-driven behaviour. So people with ADHD struggle with impulsiveness, and they make impulsive decisions that impede their long-term goals. So this can often lead to just being like, starting the morning feeling great and like, on track with your diet, and then by 4 p.m. being like, okay, I'm just going to have some chocolate, or I'm just going to have my kids' leftovers, or I'm going to have a bigger bowl, or I'm going to have a glass of wine because, I feel like it right now and I want a bit of a dopamine hit because, now everything's getting a bit tedious as the day drags on. Number 6 is switching tasks. So this normally means sticking with the same task for too long. Also, they struggle to start a change to another task. But what it normally means is that it's hard to start the task that you need to do. And then once you get into it, you find it hard to leave the task rather than saying, okay, time's up, time to move on to the next task. Where this most affects dieting is that people with ADHD this is a really common scenario, right? They'll start work in the morning and they'll usually procrastinate and find it hard to actually get started. Then once they actually get started with work, they find it hard to stop working when they start getting hungry. And one of the things that I tell all of my clients to do is to eat when you're a 6 or a 7 out of 10 in terms of hunger. And what people with ADHD will do is they will ignore or push down those feelings of hunger when they're a 6 or 7 out of 10. And they'll say, no, I'll keep going a bit longer. Because it's better to do that, not because they enjoy being hungry, but because they find it hard to abandon the task that they're currently on. And they might be 3 hours into work tasks now and they don't want to abandon it. It's 12 o'clock, they're hungry, it's time to eat. But what they'll do is they'll stick with the task for far too long and then they will get too hungry. Then they're a 10 out of 10, 11 out of 10, 12 out of 10 in terms of hunger. And they end up going to the fridge and just grabbing whatever's most convenient, because the part of your brain that is involved with decision making goes offline when you are too hungry. So you'll just make terrible decisions. You'll pick at chocolate and cheese and whatever's in the fridge. You'll eat too much. And then when you're no longer hungry, that part of your brain will come back online and you'll go, oh shit, why did I do that? It's a completely predictable pattern that happens in everyone, but it happens more with people with ADHD. 7, I think we're on 7 now, is similar, but it's slightly different, time blindness. What this often leads to is undereating. So again, similar example, haven't had breakfast, just pushed through. Now it's lunchtime. I'll keep going for another 2 hours. Now you're starving hungry because it's 2 o'clock and you haven't eaten anything. Or you're rushing around doing errands and you haven't eaten any breakfast and you quickly grab some nuts and that sort of takes off the edge off your hunger, and then it gets to 4 p.m. You've got to go and get your kids, and you haven't actually eaten anything. Then you're picking your kids up, everyone's crying and screaming and they need to eat and they need to go to the toilet. You're starving hungry, and that's when you start eating crap. Okay, so the time blindness often leads to undereating or not eating when it's time to eat, which often leads to way too much hunger later on in the day that's really hard to put out. It leads to a kind of residual hunger and lots of bad decision making around food, which then leads to fuckititis. Number 8 is decision making. They struggle with decision making basically because they're making decisions from scratch every single day. They're not following any sort of systems. They're not following any sort of plan, not just in their diet and their training, but also in the rest of their life. Okay, everything is like constant decision making. What this leads to is decision fatigue. And again, it follows very predictable patterns. Often in the morning when you're fresh, decision-making credits are quite high. You use up all of the credits, and by 4 p.m., all of those credits are used up and you've got no capacity for decision-making anymore. Number 9, filtering out details. So people, those of us with ADHD, we really struggle with filtering things out and saying, I'm just going to keep it simple. Like, I don't need this, I don't need this, and I don't need the other. This leads to overcomplicating, which then leads to avoidance. And I know this very, very well. For example, writing this podcast, scripting this podcast, I tried to include every single possible thing about, as I'm writing my script, every single possible thing about that I know about ADHD and everything that I don't know about ADHD, I try to get into this podcast episode and make sure that it encompasses everything. And then what happens is I end up abandoning it mid-recording and abandoning my plan. And then it's been 3 weeks and I still haven't recorded this damn podcast episode. I'm very good at filtering out what matters and what doesn't matter in my diet and my training, but only because I've gone through the very painful task of learning what doesn't work and what doesn't matter, because of my ADHD hyperfocus and attention to detail and trying every possible eventuality over the past 15 years and learning the hard way what matters, what doesn't matter, and what I need to filter out. And honestly, over the years, about 10% of what I've learned about training, nutrition, diet actually matters for training, nutrition, and diet. I've learned so much junk that is just fluff, that just doesn't matter. The problem is most people with ADHD don't know how to filter that stuff out. So they get completely overwhelmed with details. And then they avoid the task. And this is most obvious when it comes to planning, when it comes to writing a meal plan. Again, the meal plan that I ask my clients to make is incredibly simple and shouldn't take more than 10 minutes to do. The ones with ADHD will spend an hour on the task. They will have 10 times as much detail as what I ask from them. And then they'll feel completely overwhelmed by it. They'll have abandoned it towards the end. And then they'll be like, Jen, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to eat, right? It's typical ADHD, overcomplicating, leading to avoidance. And then finally, number 10 is probably the most obvious one, concentration on focus. concentration and focus, specifically on tasks that are boring or uninteresting. What this leads to is focusing on what excites you. This leads to impulsivity, poor decision making, inconsistency, and focus on short-term reward and dopamine hits rather than doing things that are in your long-term interests. Okay, so there's a long list of things with ADHD, things that people with ADHD struggle with. And if you have ADHD, you're probably sitting there going, yeah, that happens to me, that happens to me, that happens to me. And maybe, hopefully, listening to that list, you maybe thought, oh, I'm the only one who struggles with this particular thing. But hopefully in that list, you will have heard things and gone, oh, okay, well, other people struggle with this. I can guarantee you, ADHD or no ADHD, everyone who comes and starts on my program, they all think that their problems are completely unique, that nobody else has these problems, and that I will never have heard of it and I won't know what to do with it. But I hear the exact same problems over and over and over again, and everyone has them. And I think part of understanding, of starting to solve your problems is realizing that it's not because there's something wrong with you. It's not that there isn't a solution to this problem. These are things that everyone shares. These are problems of being a human that make certain aspects of achieving our goals hard. And so understanding that this is a shared human thing is often like the first step to realizing the insight that you need to then figuring out how to change it. But everyone with ADHD reliably comes up with the exact same problems over and over and over again. Jen, but listen, what I struggle with is this, and I don't know how to do this, and I don't know how to do that. And they think that they are the only ones in the world who struggle with this, not realizing that I've dealt with this exact same thing many, many, many times. And in this podcast episode, look, there are lots of things that can help with ADHD, but I'm going to share with you the one thing that is more important than anything else. And that is what I call mechanistic eating. And kind of like it sounds, it's the opposite of intuitive eating. It's eating according to kind of mechanistic, more rigid rules and structure, and creating a system. So instead of guessing or making it up as you go along, or just kind of winging it, you follow a structure, you follow a system that reduces cognitive load by standardizing key parts of your day and automating certain decisions. And in a moment, I'm going to go through exactly what mechanistic eating involves and kind of the different aspects that you should focus on. But first of all, I want to zoom out a little bit, okay? Because when it comes to ADHD treatment or management, there are basically kind of three big overarching areas of treatment, etc. The first one is medication, obviously, right? And that can help. And some people, maybe they don't need medication, but they can really thrive on medication, myself included. The second kind of approach, strategies and understanding. So actually learning about how the ADHD brain works and understanding strategies for working with your ADHD. And the third area of treatment management is lifestyle, like going to bed on time, eating the right amount of food, exercising, managing stress. And I would argue that using all three of these approaches, also just like 2 out of 3, but the more angles that you come at this from, it's a much better treatment plan, right? Like rather than just one or the other, right? So if you just focus on strategies for ADHD, but your life is a mess and you stay up until 2 a.m., right? Like no strategies for ADHD are going to work when you're like chronically sleep deprived, if you're not exercising, if you're not getting any sunlight, right? These things matter so much, right? But anyway, so if we focus in on the second area, that's what this podcast is about, right? I'm not going to tell you to take medication or to talk to necessarily about lifestyle. We'll leave that for another podcast. But let's talk about the strategies involved in managing ADHD. And there are lots and lots and lots of different strategies that can help, like, you know, writing a time log and things like that. I won't go through everything in this podcast because it's just too much detail. Maybe I'll do it if people are interested. I'll go through some of those in a different podcast episode. But ultimately, all strategies for ADHD are basically they do one of two things, okay? They're either things that, number one, help you capitalize on certain positive aspects of your ADHD and triple down on those strengths. So for example, people with ADHD often have a very, very, very narrow field of interest. So for me, for example, interest slash obsession. I've spent the past 15 years completely obsessed with health, fitness, training, and then honing in on the things like, postpartum, pregnancy, doing it with small kids, all of the kind of psychological side of it, like CBT, blah, blah, blah. This has given me an incredibly narrow niche, like, being a woman and a mother of young children, like trying to lose fat and build muscle, right? It's a very, very, very particular niche, but I make a living doing it. Another another strength is ADHD hyperfocus. So we can often get into something, sometimes once I get into writing or, doing something very specific or, playing with my houseplants, I can do it for hours and I don't get bored and I don't get tired. And if you, leverage that, you can often, do really, really well in your work or whatever it is that you're interested in, as long as you are interested and excited by it. And the other thing is enthusiasm and energy. Okay, people with ADHD tend to be very high energy, tend to get very enthusiastic about these things that they have narrow areas of interest in. A lot of people say that comes across with me, that I really enjoy these topics and I'm really into it. So anyway, the first kind of group of strategies and techniques is to do with tripling down on those strengths, right? Like harnessing those strengths and using that energy. And the second group is the opposite. The second group of strategies and techniques for coping with ADHD is actually closing the gap on your weak points and building capacity in the areas where you have weakness, where you're not good at. And this is the hard sell. This is the unsexy part, because what I've learned as somebody with ADHD, as somebody who's worked with lots of people with ADHD, is that it's very tempting to think I can just follow my ADHD and follow my excitement with things, and I can just build on my strengths and I don't have to build up my weaknesses, and I can just work on those things that make me excited. But I don't have to, there's there's so much resistance and avoidance when it comes to the second group of things, of actually working on the things that you find hard and realizing that in order to succeed at certain things in life, you have to work on some of these weaknesses and you have to bring them up to an acceptable level. I find that most people with ADHD will say something like they'll sort of try to find ways to use their ADHD. So for example, when they get very excited and energetic about something, they can just plug in and just go. And so they can do it with their work, for example. But they don't feel that way about exercise or about their diet. And they feel excited when it's new, but then after a few days, it gets a bit boring and then they just kind of stop doing it. And they try to find ways to increase that feeling of motivation, which I think a lot of people confuse motivation with excitement. So then they try to recreate that feeling of excitement that they have about something that they actually enjoy or something that's actually new, and try to feel that level of energy about their diet and exercise all the time. But this isn't possible, right? It's just not, it's a fool's errand. It's just never, ever, ever going to happen. It is not impossible to feel excited about things like that all the time. And so they end up in a constant cycle of getting really fed up with their body and then feeling very, very motivated to change. And they start a new diet and it's all new and it's exciting. So they do it. But after a few days, after a couple of weeks, they hit what I call the valley of disappointment, where the excitement wears off, the novelty wears off, and now it feels boring and unsexy and they don't want to do it. And then they stop doing it until they feel shit enough about their bodies again that then they start the next diet and they feel very excited again, and they do it for a while until they don't do it anymore. But they're relying on this feeling of excitement that they call motivation, this feeling of novelty, that is eventually going to wear off. So anyway, what a lot of people with ADHD are very good at is they're very good at that first group, that first category of strategies. They're very good at capitalizing on their strength and tripling down on their strengths. Now, I'm a big believer in tripling down on your strengths. That's really, really, really important. And if you can outsource things or make things easier that you're not good at, understanding your weaknesses, like, look, I'm never going to be good with numbers. It doesn't matter. I have to learn enough arithmetic to be able to cope with everyday life and billing and accounting and things like that. I just have to. But, my husband is a mechanical engineer. I'm never going to understand maths and physics to his degree of understanding. It's never going to happen. But I don't need to understand it. Okay, that's my weakness. But it has to be brought up to a decent enough level for me to cope with everyday life. And vice versa. If you are a programmer, if you're a mathematician, if you're a mechanical engineer like my husband, who's very, very, very good at with numbers, but shit with reading and writing, you have to learn how to read and write, right? You have to bring it up to an acceptable level, even if you're never going to be like, a world-winning author, right? But you do need to be able to cope with reading and writing on a basic level. ADHD is similar, but what I find is that most people with ADHD, they avoid the shit out of doing the things that bring their weaknesses up to a decent enough level to be able to cope with the demands of everyday life. So, this is a long preamble for me to say that at the end of the day, when it comes to fat loss and ADHD, you do actually have to do some of the stuff that you don't want to do. That means starting when you don't feel like it, finishing the stuff that you started, focusing even when you don't want to, repeating. No dopamine hit, no novelty, just execution. Okay, and one of the things that I've learned about having ADHD is that a lot of the strategies that I've learned that have helped me with ADHD are actually things that I don't want to do and things that don't feel very natural and things that are a bit painful for me to do. So for example, a time log. Okay, so one example, this is one strategy that I learned, a very, very, very simple strategy that helps with the executive function, that helps with starting and finishing tasks. So what I tend to do is if there are tedious tasks that I perceive to be difficult, I procrastinate and I put them off, sometimes for years. A simple time log teaches you how to do is to just address the task. So you write 4 columns, okay? The first column is time started, second column is time ended, third column is total time taken, and then the fourth column is the name of the task. Very simple. Then what you do is you look at the time when you start. I'll have a task like, for example, I have to call my healthcare provider to book a doctor's appointment. I will put this off for months, right? For myself and for my children, it's ridiculous. And I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it because I hate getting on the phone to people. What a time log taught me how to do is then to call the person and to do nothing else, to just focus on this one task until I'm done with it. Time ended. It took me 4 minutes to complete that task and I put it off for 7 months. This kind of it helps with the executive side of things, of just starting and finishing, focusing on one thing at a time, and doing the thing, not because you feel like it, doing it even when you don't feel like it, and finishing it even though it's painful. But then what happens is you realize it only took me 4 fucking minutes. Why didn't I do this 7 months ago? This is so ridiculous. It's been on my to-do list and it's gotten moved every single day, every week to my next to-do list. It's absolutely ridiculous. Or another example was get passport applications for my kid. When I started it and then ended it, it was done in like an hour and 12 minutes. At the end of the day, an hour and 12 minutes is not that big of a deal. It didn't take me that long. It wasn't the end of the world. But I put it off for months on end, I think even years on end. And I could have just done it so quickly. And same with tracking, right? Tracking my food. Like somebody, I don't want to do this, it's so boring. And you do it, it takes you 3 minutes and 20 seconds. It's like, why did I put that off? It's really not that big of a deal. Okay, so, but my point is, okay, time logging is just one example of a strategy for people with ADHD that goes into that second category, okay? It's not fun to do, and it's bringing our weaknesses up to a certain level. We're never going to find it easy to just look. I have a friend who is like the most un-ADHD person I've ever met. And with these sorts of tasks, she's just like, right, in the morning, what do I need to do? I've got 20 minutes to do. I can get X number of tasks done before and then I go on, and now it's time for me to go to work, and that's it. And she keeps on top of her task all the time. She has very linear thinking. People with ADHD really struggle with this kind of execution. So a time log is a great example of something that just gets you to over those first hurdles and creates then small successes that you then take into future experiences, and a strategy that you can use. Like, I find, even though making a time log takes more time than not making a time log, I still find it more effective for me actually getting tasks done, because I might get 4 or 5 tasks done using that same time log, whereas I would have done 0 if I'd just been left to my own devices. So what I recommend, a lot of the strategies that I recommend for people with ADHD, actually it relies on, and what I've seen time and time again when it comes to your diet, is that you have to move away from like what you feel like and just winging it and just doing whatever you want to do each day, and saying things like, I'll just eat intuitively today. I'll decide based on how I feel. I'll try to be flexible. I don't want to be overly restrictive. And what it ends up in is grazing, ordering takeaways, saying I'll start again tomorrow, fuckititis, or you making 10,000 decisions about food every day, not having bandwidth for anything else, so then giving up on your diet. So this is where mechanistic eating comes in. It's about following a structure and a system that, again, reduces your cognitive load by kind of automating certain decisions. Let me give you kind of the highlights of what I think mechanistic eating should include. It's kind of a list of rules or systems or kind of an overarching structure to how you eat, so that you're not kind of like figuring it out from moment to moment and just doing it on the fly. So the first kind of rule, and I know the word rule is so unfashionable when it comes to food, and it makes people think of disordered eating or eating disorders. But this is just to help you make decisions, right? The thing about eating is that you can't just put it off, right? You can't just not do it in order to save time. And most people feel so overwhelmed about what to eat and when to eat and how much to eat and blah, 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 blah. But it's not like smoking where you can just not smoke, or alcohol where you can just not drink alcohol, or, like, it's something that you actually have to do several times a day. So you have to have, it's much better to have like a preset structure to follow rather than making these decisions for yourself on a moment by moment basis. Okay, so let's get into the actual aspects of mechanistic eating. So number 1, eating meals, not snacks. Just as a general rule for yourself, you don't snack, okay? You eat meals, you eat whole meals that keep you full, that make you full, so that you don't have to eat again for several hours, okay? And not snacking on little bits and bobs. And just for myself, it's not that I never snack. I obviously do, but as a blanket rule, I try not to snack, because snacking is normally not about hunger. It's normally just about entertainment, or about like impulsivity, or about that dopamine hit. It's not normally actually about hunger. And when it is about hunger, grazing and snacking is the worst way of dealing with hunger. If you get hungry, you want to eat a proper meal that's going to keep you full for at least 4 hours. And number 2 is having 4 meals a day, okay? Like, not like just making it up and sometimes having 2 and sometimes having 1 and sometimes grazing all day. Aiming to have 4 meals a day every day. Number 3 is having set anchor points. So the idea of anchor points completely changed everything about how I eat, and completely changed my body, completely changed everything about my life. The idea of anchor points is that you eat at the exact same time every day, okay? Or more or less. So what works for most people is 8 a.m., 12, 4 p.m., 8 p.m. Now, you don't have to eat on the dot, okay? You're aiming for a 2-hour window, but the point being is that you're eating at regular meal time and setting those parts of your day into a regular schedule, so that, again, you're not making it up as you go along. You're just like, oh, it's 8 o'clock. I'm going to need to eat something because then I'll be hungry again. Like, you just know that you need a certain amount at a certain time to get you through to the next anchor point. And I actually implemented this a few years ago for mental health reasons. It was after I had my first son, and I was just somebody who very much did things as I went, and just like made it up as I went along, and I got completely overwhelmed with decision fatigue. And bringing in anchor point did a couple of things for me. It took out a lot of decision making about food, but it also regulated my circadian rhythm more, so that I slept better, which, is another topic, but this is another problem for people with ADHD. So eating at regular meal times, getting up at regular times, going to bed at a regular time. These are the sorts of anchor points that you need in your day to keep circadian rhythm in balance and in a place where you can go to sleep when you need to sleep and wake up when you need to wake up. So these times of 8, 12, 4, 8, these just fit really perfectly with breakfast, lunch, afternoon snack, and dinner. This is where it's like about the modern world gets so confusing because we're constantly reinventing the wheel. Everyone just eats whenever they want to eat, but in every country in the entire world, throughout all of history, people have basically eaten breakfast, lunch, afternoon snack, and dinner. And there's some variation on those themes, but pretty much everyone eats that way. And it's only in Anglo, highly individualistic, weird Western countries where we don't follow this structure and everyone eats whenever they want to eat and there's no kind of real rhythms to everyone's lives. And then we introduce, different eating times for kids and toddlers and babies that are completely out of whack with our own eating time. None of it makes any sense. And then we wonder why we're completely overwhelmed and confused. Anyway, moving on. Number 4 is having balanced meals. Balanced meals means focusing on protein and fiber first. So making sure at each meal you have a good portion of protein and a good portion of fiber. And most meals you're going to need some carbohydrate, and some meals you're going to have some fat with it. Going into each meal with a template for your meals. So yes, there are meals that you will rinse, repeat that are based off this template, but also this still applies if you're not making your own meals. So if your husband's cooking, or if you go to someone else's house for dinner, or if you're ordering in or eating out, you still can apply the same structure. Rather than going in, just being like, I'll just have a bit of everything. Try to have a protein, a fiber, big portion, so you can divide it into your plate, right? So you can have a quarter of the plate protein, quarter of the plate carbs, and half the plate veggies. Obviously not every single meal is going to look like this, and we're going to have convenience meals, but for the most part, trying to implement this strategy and this kind of template, it reduces a lot of decision fatigue about what should I have and how much should I have. Sometimes you're just going to have fun meals where you go to a restaurant, you just eat whatever you want. That's fine. But just for your day-to-day life, where you're trying to make decisions about food and especially when you're trying to work towards certain fat loss goals, this can really, really help reduce cognitive load. So don't just go into each meal, eat what you want, and then try to figure out how to track it. Okay, that's what most people with ADHD do. And then they're like, oh, I have no idea how to track this because I took 3 bites of this and 1 bite of that. That's the worst way of going about it, right? Go in with a plan and a template and try to follow that. Number 5 is to keep it as simple as possible. Keep it simple, stupid. Again, this is easier said than done. And a lot of what I'm talking about here will hopefully help you simplify it because people, again, like I said in the beginning, people with ADHD tend to overcomplicate things. So you want to keep to a simple plan. Your brain will always tell you, I need more variety. I need more complexity. This is too simple. This won't work. I need to make it more complicated. It doesn't need to be more complicated. Often the more simple plan is the best one. Okay, number 6, you want to eat whole foods. Okay, you want to base your diet on whole foods. And a good rule of thumb is to be making sure that 80% of the time you get whole food. So again, when I'm talking about these kind of rules or these aspects of mechanistic eating, it's not like you have to eat whole foods, you have to eat clean, you're never ever allowed to have junk. No, it's just about creating some guardrails, okay, creating some bright lines somewhere so that because what a lot of people do is they go, oh, it's okay to have a bit of what I like or convenience foods. Before they know it, their entire diet is made up of convenience foods or junk foods, and they're no longer eating a whole foods diet. Or they swing all the way the other way and then they cut out all the junk until eventually they give up and then they go back to eating junk all the time. Most of your diet needs to come from whole foods. And when I say whole foods, I mean single ingredient, minimally processed foods like eggs, chicken, beef, cottage cheese, milk, other dairy product, bread, right? Even though that's got some processing behind it. Pasta, rice, okay? So grains, fruits, vegetables, olive oil. It's not difficult, but if most of your diet is made up of, a croissant at a bakery and then a microwavable protein pancake and then, a protein bar, right? This is not the way to eat. This is not food. It doesn't mean you can't ever have those things, but we need to focus on the minimally processed whole foods rather than constantly eating processed stuff. Number 7 is focusing on filling foods. This is a topic that is so important for fat loss that most people overlook. But again, 80% of the time trying to eat filling foods. What does that mean? It means foods, most people diet by trying to eat less portions of them, and that leaves them hungry. And what you need to do is the opposite. You need to eat big portions of food. And in order to eat big portions of food, but still keep your calorie intake lower, is to have foods that are low in calorie density. So your body can't register, oh, I've had 400 calories, I'm full, or I've eaten 1,500 calories today, I've had enough food, I'm not going to be hungry. Your body needs a certain amount of weight and volume of food to be full. And so you might need 400 grams or 300 grams per meal to feel full and satisfied. If you can eat 300 grams worth of food that has 250 calories in it, or you can eat 300 grams of food that has 2,000 calories in it, depending on calorie density. So moving away from thinking just about how many calories is in this, I'll have a super small portion of it, to thinking, how can I have a big portion of food here and eat more volume and also take in fewer calories? And that means eating more filling food, lower calorie dense food. So things like low fat dairy, things like bread, right? Rice, other grain, eating lean protein like chicken breast or chicken thighs as well, it doesn't matter. Meat, eggs, these all have some fat in it, right? But like turkey is great. Having fruits and vegetables, right? These are all foods that are quite low in calorie density, so that they're like 200 calories per 100 grams or less. Whereas a lot of foods that people eat, like chocolate, are 500 calories per 100 grams. If you base your diet on very high calorie density foods, you're either gonna be hungry or taking in a huge amount of calories, or both. Okay, number 8 is to have certain rinse repeat meals that you have over and over again and you don't change up. So for example, I have yogurt and fruit for breakfast, and specifically I have frozen raspberries that I blast in the microwave for like 30 seconds with some sugar, and I have it on a low fat protein or Greek yogurt, or normally 0% fat. And it gives me a nice big portion of food, almost 250 grams, but calories are less than 150 calories. It's a nice filling meal. I enjoy it. I never vary my breakfast. I eat the exact same breakfast every single day because I enjoy it, but also because I know it's what I need. And I don't need things that are more fun earlier in the day. I don't need a varied breakfast. I don't need to have different things. You don't need 3 different breakfasts or 10 different breakfasts that you rotate. You don't need a different meal every single day of the week. You just need one thing that you eat over and over and over again. And you can do the same for lunch and afternoon snack, but you can have like 2 or 3 options that you really enjoy that you just rinse repeat, especially during the week where you just need to eat something and get on with your life. This is so important. But again, people with ADHD will sort of go, oh, what do I fancy? What should I have today? What should I order from Walt? What should I order from Deliveroo or whatever? Instead of just having the same things over and over again. So some of my set meals are, we often have cooked chicken. So I just chop up a salad and then have, 200 grams of cooked chicken on my salad for lunch. If I don't have anything in the house, I have 3 scrambled eggs on a slice of toast. My afternoon snack is normally a slice of toast with cottage cheese and some kind of topping. Backup dinner is a cheese toastie. I have a few other options like spaghetti bolognese or meatballs and couscous that I eat on rinse repeat as well. But when I don't have anything in the house, I just rely on my cheese toastie. And then the final thing, number 9, you want to have pre-decided rules that remove in the moment thinking. So here are a few examples. If I'm hungry in between meals, I'll eat X. Okay, so obviously the aim is to eat breakfast, lunch, afternoon snack and dinner, but maybe you time things wrong, or in the beginning you don't know exactly how much you eat and you have too small of a portion. So you're hungry, at 6 o'clock when your dinner is at 8 o'clock. Okay, so just decide beforehand what you're going to have. I'm going to have a protein yogurt and a piece of fruit to get me through until dinner. Or maybe you go to bed at 11 after having dinner at 7 and now you're hungry again. I'm just going to have a protein yogurt and a piece of fruit. Okay, I'm using that as an example. It could be a slice of toast with whatever, right? It doesn't matter. But having something that you'll have in that spot. So for me, if, for example, I'm out and about doing errands and I'm like suddenly hungry, I go and buy a protein bar. There's a particular protein bar I really, really enjoy. I have that. That's it, right? Because I don't want to go and have a full meal or buy like whatever it is. Or maybe it's lunchtime. I'll go and buy a sandwich. I always get a smoked salmon sandwich if I'm out, because that's what I enjoy the most. But having certain rules, when X, I'll do Y. Okay, second rule that's great to implement. Again, I know the word rules sounds terrible, but these are things that just help you make reduce decision making. So the second rule is I'll eat when I'm a 6 out of 7, when I'm a 6 or a 7 out of 10 in terms of hunger. Okay, so when you start feeling hungry and you're like a 6 or 7 out of 10, so you could eat a sandwich and you'd enjoy it, you're hungry enough to eat dinner. If you couldn't eat a sandwich, you're not hungry enough yet. You're a 4 or 5 out of 10. But if you're so starving hungry that eating a bowl of white rice with no salt on it would taste amazing because you're so hungry, or like you just have get in my belly syndrome, anything's going to taste incredible, right? You're too hungry. Okay, that is too hungry. You don't want to be getting to that level. So just having that rule for yourself. Again, people with ADHD tend to underestimate their hunger and try and push through it and stick with the task that they're currently on, and then they end up so freaking hungry that like that they can't make any decisions. So having that rule that you're going to eat when you're less hungry stops you from getting overly hungry. Okay, the third rule, if I'm leaving the house, I'll take X with me. So for me, I have an adult lunchbox, and if I'm going out on errands, or if I'm going out to pick my kids up, or we've got an afternoon out, I always put in 2 protein yogurts, 2 protein bars, 2 pieces of fruit. I don't complicate it. It takes me 30 seconds to do that. I usually throw in a couple of spoons and a couple of ice packs. I normally don't end up eating it, and I put it back in the fridge when I get home. Or sometimes I only have a yogurt and a piece of fruit and I don't need anything else. And then sometimes I overrun and I get carried away with what I'm doing, and then I need the second protein yogurt or I need a protein bar, and I have it to hand. Okay, but this reduces cognitive load. It's not like, oh, I've got to leave the house, but I need to make lunch first. What should I have? Should I make a tuna sandwich, or should I make this? Oh no, I don't have tuna. Should I get this? Should I get that? And then it takes you half an hour to make it, and now you're leaving much later. No, you just have set things that you grab, and it takes you 30 seconds and that's it. And it takes no decision making whatsoever, okay? It's just about simplicity and convenience. Again, this is where people tend to overcomplicate it. Oh no, I need to take a salad with me. Oh, but then it'll get hot by the time I eat it. How am I gonna refrigerate it? Or maybe I'll take like a cool bag. I'll have it. This is where ADHD people proliferate, like their decisions and their thoughts around it proliferate to such a degree that they overcomplicate it. That you just need something really, really simple that you can execute really, really easily. Number 4, if I'm out, I'll buy X. This is where for me, if it's like, okay, I've been out since the morning, it's lunchtime, I'm gonna be out for a couple more hours, I just buy either a tuna sandwich or a salmon sandwich, whichever one looks best from the closest coffee shop that I have available. Okay, I just have a meal, right? And if I'm in between meals, or maybe I had something before I left the house, or maybe it's 12, but I want to just eat something. I've got a couple more things to do, and then I don't want to be hungry because then I can't make decisions about what I need to do, and then I get flustered and like overstimulated. But I'm going to be home by 1 and I want to eat my lunch then. I don't want to go and spend 50 shekels on a sandwich that isn't actually that good anyway. That's when I go and buy a protein bar. I either have some with me, or I go and just buy a protein bar from Superfarm, from the local drugstore, and I just have that, right? It's just enough to get me through for another hour. I can do my last little bits and bobs and then get back, okay? But having a plan of, if I'm out, I'll buy X, okay? So it might be a couple of different scenarios, but you want to keep it simple, and then you just rinse, repeat. Whenever I'm out, most of the time, I'll just have a protein bar. There's one that I really, really enjoy, so I really enjoy having it out. And then it's an expensive protein bar, but it cost me 15 shekels instead of costing me 50 shekels, plus a coffee, plus a this, plus a that for a sandwich. Okay, so it keeps that cognitive load really, really low. I know so many people who like don't want to implement this because, oh, a protein bar isn't like the best thing to have. And then they buy raisins covered with yogurt covered, like yogurt covered raisins, and they munch on that, or they buy crisps, or they buy chocolate, and now they've eaten 500 calories, and they're less full than if they just had the 250 calorie protein bar. Okay, so it's just about having something that's good enough. It doesn't need to be the absolute perfect thing. And the fifth kind of rule that I'll leave you with is, if I don't eat fun foods when I'm hungry. I cannot tell you how powerful this simple rule is. So again, I recommend flexible dieting. You need to get most of your diet needs to be from whole foods, nutritious foods, but you do like 20%, 10 to 20% can be from fun foods. But don't eat fun foods when you're hungry. Okay, so fun foods are highly palatable. When you add hunger to that, you end up eating way too much of it. You can't control portion sizes. And because it's very calorie dense, you end up eating way too many calories in order to feel full. So if you are hungry, if you're experiencing actual physiological hunger, okay, remember there's two reasons why people eat: physiological hunger or non-hunger eating reasons, like I'm tired, I'm bored, like it's entertainment. If you are feeling physiological hunger, you need to eat actual food. You need nutritious food. You need something that fuels you. You need something that makes you fill up. You need something that gives you nutrients. You can't just live off of fun foods. So yes, you can include fun foods in your diet: chocolate, brownies, cakes, ice cream, desserts, things like that. But don't eat them when you are actually hungry. Eat real food first and then have some of the fun food afterwards, if you still want it after you're not hungry anymore. 9 times out of 10, it's not gonna feel as tempting when you've eaten and you're full. And then sometimes, you are going to still want a little bit of chocolate or whatever, but then you're gonna eat a couple of squares instead of a whole bar. Managing hunger is more important than anything else when it comes to like cravings and things like that. And again, it's moving away from what do I crave? What do I feel like eating? And eating what you need to eat instead of what you feel like eating. So these rules, but also this sort of template for eating, if you implement it, remove so much decision making around fat loss and around the foods that you eat. And at the end of the day, there are certain things that work when it comes to fat loss and certain things that don't work. And just eating what you feel like all the time, eating when you feel like eating, just winging it doesn't work. It's not a fat loss strategy, okay? You have to implement a structure and an overall system that actually works. Okay, so let's just quickly go over some objections that I often get from people with ADHD about this way of eating. So the most obvious one that's probably coming to your mind is, isn't this boring? And my answer is yes, and that's the point. Boring equals predictable, which equals repeatable. You don't need your diet to be exciting. You need it to work. And I would argue that what's even more boring than this way of eating is spinning your wheels for years and years and years and not getting the results you want, and consistently being 10 kilos, 20 kilos over the weight that you want to be, and not fitting your clothes and not feeling good for another summer and for another birthday, and feeling shit about how you look in photos. That to me is way more boring than implementing strategies that in my diet that get me the results that I'm looking for. It is way more boring to gradually gain weight over the years. It's way more boring to feel completely overwhelmed about food and exercise for years, even though it's just a basic requirement of living. This is where people with ADHD want novelty and excitement all the time, but you have to understand that the desire for novelty and excitement in everything you do is stopping you from getting results, in particular when it comes to your diet and exercise. And here's what I would say. A lot of people who've started my program, I've had lots of great results with people with ADHD, but one thing that comes up with some people who start my program with ADHD is that in the beginning, they're all guns blazing, they're all gung-ho, they're super excited about it, they're doing everything, they're filling in all the forms, they're doing their weekly check-in, they're doing everything. And then after about 2 weeks, they hit what I call the valley of disappointment. The novelty wears off and they fizzle out and they stop doing it. And then that's when they start wanting a new plan, or can we change the plan, or can we write a new plan, or can you write me a new training plan, or like this is getting boring, or tracking is boring, or whatever it is. But at some point you have to learn that even though novelty and excitement feels good and feels right, it's not the answer to your problems. Because this is what I say to people who are on my training. Look, we can go and write a brand new training plan. We can go and write a brand new diet plan. But what happens in 45 minutes when you get bored of that and you want a new one again, right? You are eventually going to get bored of any new plan that we create. And let's say you leave my program and say, okay, it's not for me, whatever. And then you go on, at some point you start a new diet, right? Eventually that is going to get boring to you as well. So anything new that you start is by definition not going to be new after a while. So it's never going to be the solution. And this is where like accepting trade-offs becomes really, really important. Accepting that if I want certain results, I'm going to have to stick with something for longer than 45 minutes. I'm going to have to stick with something for longer than 3 days. Like no plan is ever going to work for me because it's never going to always be new and exciting like it is in the beginning. And I would add to that now that you have children, life just doesn't allow for that. Life with kids doesn't allow for that. Life with kids doesn't allow for constant novelty, right? Kids like routine. Kids like, they wake up at the exact same bloody time every day. They need to go to bed at the same time every day. They get hungry at reliable intervals every day. They like predictability. They like routines. So if you're the sort of person who wants to stop and start and, do new things all the time, right? It's just, don't have kids, right? If you don't have kids, then you can keep on staying up until 4 a.m. working and then sleeping into midday. You can keep on with that lifestyle. But having children, and this is coming from somebody with ADHD who has had children, having children forced me into going to bed at the same time every day, going to bed early, waking up early, doing the same thing, getting my house clean early in the morning before I start with other things, because you just need to do certain things every day. It just needs to get done. Okay, the second objection is, what about balance and variety? So variety can exist within structure. Not every meal needs to be different. The problem with the modern world is that there is too much novelty and too much variety. Not that there isn't enough. And there is too much abundance. There's too much of everything. There's too much, the quantity is too much, but also the number of choices that you have are too much. You can always order in, or you could make something different, or find something on Instagram to make, or you could go and get waffles or whatever, right? There's too much abundance. There's too much choice. And this leads to what's called the paradox of choice, right? The more choice we have, the less happy we are with the things that we choose, and the more overwhelmed we feel by decisions, and the less happy we feel overall, and the less results we get overall. If you haven't read it, The Paradox of Choice is a fantastic book. It's a bit outdated now, but it completely changed how I think about everything, and it's made me automate lots of areas of my life so that I don't get overwhelmed with decisions, like the clothes that I wear, like my wardrobe, like the way things are organized in my home, like my exercise routine. And the point isn't that, okay, you come up with this meal plan and then you must eat the exact same thing every single day for the rest of your life until you die. That's not the point. And it's not that you can never have change. The world will present you with change variety. You'll have a meal out with clients, right? You'll have a meal out for your birthday. You have holiday meals with your family. You'll get invited to dinner at your friend's house on Friday night. All these things will bring variety into your life. So creating a schedule and creating a routine around eating that is a little bit boring, a little bit repetitive, means that you will still have variety, right? I'm not saying you're never allowed any sort of variety. People get very black and white with this. They go from eating something different every single day to then eating the exact same thing and the exact same pot of cottage cheese and slice of toast and pepper, and they're like, oh, I'm bored of this. And it's like, yeah, well, you do need a little bit of variety. Or, oh, I'm eating out with my friends for lunch on Friday, and what should I do? Am I gonna do I have to have the same cottage cheese and whatever that I have at home? It's like, no, obviously you're gonna have something different. Go and enjoy a meal in a restaurant or in a cafe or whatever it is. That variety is gonna come into your life. It's just that 80%, 90% of what you do, you rinse, repeat the same things that work, so that you're constantly making decisions all the time. And then you bring little bits of variety in when, other things are going on. The third objection is that it feels restrictive. And it is restrictive. It's restrictive in the same way that routines are restrictive. They remove chaos so that you can function. The thing is that routine, structure, systems is the best antidote for ADHD. It's a medicine with a bitter taste that most people don't like the taste of. They want to always be capitalizing on their strengths, but the reality is that you do have to just bring your weaknesses up. The ability to just do boring things that you don't feel like doing, you need to be able to do that to a certain degree. This isn't about forcing you to become someone else. It's about increasing your capacity around things that you don't like to do but are in your best long-term interest. And this is where my work has also shown me how you just have to have systems. You have to have a system. You have to have a routine. So I have a certain routine for like days of the week and things that I have to do every day and my structure for the day. Okay, so Sundays is for finishing off admin, recording podcasts like this, making content, doing any tasks for my clients that I haven't managed to do the previous week. Mondays and Tuesdays are largely for going through check-ins. Tuesday and Wednesday is for doing all of my tasks for my clients. And then Thursday is again about like content and doing some of the behind the scenes stuff. And then my structure to my day is that in the morning, I try to do cognitive heavy tasks like a podcast like this, writing the script, recording, things that are difficult to do. And then I move on to slightly less cognitively demanding tasks like answering messages from my clients, doing tasks for my clients. And then at the end of the day, when I'm tired, I do very low cognitive load tasks. So I either do, that's when I do like, the pissy admin, like writing invoices or any like little bits that I need to finish off, like cancellations or like onboarding and certain things that are very like repetitive, uploading a podcast, for example. These are very low cognitive load tasks. And I also find that if I have a message from a client that is tricky to answer, either because very emotional or feelings coming into the mix and I'm cognitively depleted by the end of the day, I don't answer then, because that's when I get frustrated or I get defensive or I take things personal. I leave it until I'm fresh the next day, because if I'm not functioning fully, my cognitive anyway, it doesn't matter. Like I have certain systems for my week that are very, very, very repetitive. When I onboard somebody, when I go through check-ins, I do it in a very systematic manner and I send people very predictable things every single week. And then when I have tasks to do for clients, like reviewing videos or sending them feedback on something or writing them a new program, I also have to-do lists that are systematized so that I know exactly what to do on Tuesday, Wednesday for my clients. And without this overall structure, if I just did whatever I feel like whenever, I just had check-ins whenever I feel like I'm not going to do it this week or we'll do it a couple of days late or like whatever, it creates chaos and it creates a lot of decision fatigue and you end up not doing anything. You get like analysis paralysis. And learning how to implement those systems in my work has also made me realize that I need the same systems with my diet and with my training, because they're things that I have to do no matter what. I have to do it whether I feel like it or not. So you have to have a system. You can't just make it up as you go along. And then finally, I think this is the fifth objection, is it's about what about how I feel? So how you feel is important, but I think there's a really important thing that we have to learn in life, that your feelings are not always good guides for what is true or for what is actually good for you. So this is a really key insight in CBT. Just because you feel something doesn't mean it's true, right? And the modern world kind of flips that on its head and tells us, like the narrative today is very much, your feelings are the most important guide. It's like female intuition or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that we often feel things that aren't true. We often have feelings that misguide us. So one example is going on social media, scrolling, and then feeling really stressed and outraged and overwhelmed by how horrible the world is. Why? Not because the world is any worse than it was 5 minutes ago, but because you've spent 5 minutes or an hour scrolling through content that makes you feel something strong. And often it makes you feel something negative. It makes you feel disappointment. It makes you feel frustration. It makes you feel anger. It makes you feel injustice, right? But it's not that those things are, necessarily true. It's just that it's manufactured to make you feel that way. And we love feeling something. And people with ADHD love feeling something. And women love feeling things, right? But it's not always a good indication of what is true in the world, right? You can just see outrage clickbait content, rage bait content that makes you feel angry, even if none of it's true, right? But even if it is true, right, you feeling it more strongly isn't in your best interest. And you have to learn that it's the same when it comes to your diet. Just because you feel frustrated that your weight's not coming down, or you feel like, there's no point because the weight went up this morning, it doesn't mean that you should act on it. Just because you feel like you want to give up, just because you feel like something, you shouldn't always make every decision based on how you feel. Now, how you feel is important, but it's not the only thing that is important. And when it comes to hunger and fullness cues, they are also important. They really are. It's not like I'm saying you have to eat just in this mechanistic way and never ever listen. If you're hungry, you just push through it. No, you do need to listen to your hunger and fullness cues. And I'm going to do a bigger episode on mechanistic eating and how to find the balance between mechanistic eating and intuitive eating, because it's not just one. It's not this podcast is called the Healthy Middle Ground podcast, right? It's not just one extreme or the other. There's something in between. But what mechanistic eating helps you to do is helps you to, first of all, regulate your hunger and fullness. And second of all, because you have a system to follow, it doesn't mean you can't ever change that system. If you get it wrong and you eat too little at lunch and then you're hungry at 2 p.m., it doesn't mean, I can't eat because it's not the time to eat yet. No, you need to eat something. You need to listen to those hunger signals. But if you're getting hungry in between meals, it means something, right? It's feedback that what you're eating isn't making you full enough, or you're not eating enough for lunch and breakfast, and you need a little bit more to be able to get through to the next meal, or you're eating too calorie dense foods. It means something. It's giving you feedback. So yes, you do need to tune into your hunger and fullness cues, but I find that people and women in particular, who are too tuned into their hunger and fullness cues, and that's all they pay attention to, they end up not getting results, right? You need some structure, and then you're able to actually understand your hunger and fullness cues and know where to act on them and where not. Okay, so hunger and fullness, how you feel, it is important, but it's not the only things that matter. If you always follow them, you will get muddled and overwhelmed, and how you feel often leads you astray. And it's also important to realize that how you feel is to some degree controllable and the result of your actions. So something that happens with people with ADHD, for example, right? This is a really common pattern, is they get stuck on a task, so then they put off eating, and then they get overly hungry. Remember, I mentioned this before. They get starving because they've gone too long and they haven't eaten anything yet today, and it's 2:00. That leads to overeating, because the decision-making part of your brain switches off. And once you've finished overeating and now you're full and you're no longer hungry and you've eaten a load of crap, you then feel guilty, okay? And then you feel sluggish because you've eaten too much and now you're in a food coma. If you change this, right, most people with ADHD just are in this cycle over and over and over again, just doing it over and over again, expecting different results. Today I'll just push through hunger, and somehow it won't result in overeating, even though you've done it 1,000 times before, and every single time it reliably results in overeating and then feeling guilty. What you need to realize is that what you need to change is not I'll get overly hungry and then I'll somehow control what I eat and eat the right portion and portion control and eat the right foods and make good decisions around foods. No, the thing that you need to change is the eating on time. Okay, so instead of just pushing through, you realize, okay, I'm a 6 or 7 out of 10 in terms of hunger, stopping work for a moment, tuning into how you feel. Yeah, I am hungry. I could eat a sandwich right now, but I also am not so hungry that I need to scoff whatever's right in front of me instead of actually taking 2 minutes to make a sandwich. It's also 12 o'clock or it's 11:45, so now's about the right time to eat. Then you will, this sort of behavior, right, then, and the eating on time, then allows you to eat the right amount and that choose foods that are actually good for you. So actually choosing protein and fiber and some carbohydrates that are a bit of a filler. And then you feel good after. You feel fueled. You don't feel stuffed and overly full, and you don't feel like you've eaten a load of crap. So now you feel gross. And then you're not hungry again, so that you can then blast away at work for the next few hours. So it's really important to realize that sometimes how you feel, it's not just, I feel this way and I need to respond to it. Sometimes how you feel is a result of your behavior and result of your habits and your patterns, and that to some degree it's changeable, right? And you can change the outcome if you change things in the chain of events that leads to this very predictable outcome. So people with ADHD are often led by their feelings and emotions, and it's not what is reliably best for them. So when they sort of start to think that it's a good idea to snack in the afternoon, or they start craving something sweet in the afternoon, or they feel tired and they need a pick-me-up, or they haven't eaten, all of these things, right, are avoidable when you realize that your feelings, right, this intuition, this that we have around food, is not always what's best for you, and it's often not in your long-term interest. And sometimes you need structures, you need a structure and a system that does work for your long-term interest, so that you're not just taken by impulsivity. Okay, I hope you found that helpful. That was obviously a longer podcast, and it was quite heavy on the theory or the paradigm shifts that we're trying to create to be able to implement certain behaviors. And it was also quite heavy on the specific things that you need to change. So if you have any questions about this, please put them in the comments below. This is still a topic that I'm trying to figure out, and I'm trying to figure out how best to structure it and how best to present it, and also how best to simplify it, because I'm sure I've overcomplicated the shit out of this. So if you have any questions, if there's anything that you felt like was overly complicated and you don't get, and in particular, if you have any objections, if you're like, no, this can't work because X, or like, how would I actually implement this in this thing? If there's anything that makes you feel like, no, this isn't right, I can't do this, please comment below so that I can kind of better figure out how best to present this information and how to explain it to people who feel like it's not right. And also let me know if any of this does make sense and does land and feels like something that you can implement for you. If you feel like I've properly explained the problem and given some good solutions, I'd love to hear from you. And there's a lot more to be said about this topic. This is just a snapshot, even though it's over an hour podcast. But I would like to make more podcast episodes on this, feeling things and CBT, and how we can change our thoughts and feelings about certain stuff or challenge them. And I'd love to make another podcast episode just on some of the other strategies I found, like the time log that I found really helpful for ADHD. So let me know if any of those things would be helpful. And please let me know if there are any other recommendations or requests for podcast episodes.